compulsion. So we cannot say that, oh, I have this compulsion, whatever, which I deliberately cause, and then I do things and I say, don't blame me because I was under the influence. But how did you become under the influence? By a deliberate choice I made. So Pope Innocent X, 1653, condemned as heretical the following proposition from Cornelius Jansen's argument, Augustinus. You remember that man, right? Mm-hmm. So he said, in order to merit or demerit in the state of fallen nature, it is not necessary for man to have freedom from necessity, i.e., inner determinism, but freedom from external coercion suffices, okay? Which is wrong. We said both external and internal are basically necessary for a free act. Okay? So it is this same man who said that in the pilgrim state, okay, there are certain things God is asking us to do we cannot do even with the grace of God, which is simply crazy. God would ask us to do things we are incapable of doing. But Cornelius Jansen basically taught that. So this proposition is condemned. In order to merit or demerit in the state of fallen nature, it is not necessary for man to have freedom from necessity, inner determinism, but freedom from external coercion only. That's wrong. We said both. So remember that we talked about Cornelius Jansen, who was Bishop of Yale in Belgium. He had studied St. Augustine's work and wrote a famous work called the Augustinus for the purpose of restoring to its place of honor Augustine's teaching on grace and free will. The Augustinus was first condemned by Pope Urban VIII in 1642 and finally by Pope Innocent X, who condemned again 5 propositions from the Augustinus dealing with the possibility of keeping the divine commandments and of resisting grace, the concept of freedom and predestination. The first 4 propositions are condemned as heretical, the 5th one as false and scandalous, and if understood in the sense that Christ died only for the predestined, heretical. So these are the condemned propositions. So the 5th one we'll look at in a different way. But these are the ones condemned. So Cornelius taught some of God's commandments cannot be observed by just persons with the strength they have in the present state, even if they wish to strive to observe them, nor do they have the grace that would make their observance possible. Now imagine that. Okay? Read that proposition again to see how crazy it is. Mm-hmm. So it means that God is asking us to do certain things we are incapable of doing even with His help. So why would God command it?
It's not possible.
Why would God command it if we cannot do it?
It's impossible that we can't do it with God's help.
So he's basically saying that God's grace, okay, can be ineffective even if we want to cooperate with that grace. That's why our next section will go deep into the efficacy of grace. Okay? So this proposition is basically flatly wrong, okay? Because God cannot ask us to do something He hasn't given us the capacity to be able to do. God cannot ask us to do the impossible. Okay? It becomes difficult for me to do because I'm not cooperating with the grace God has given. So if God gives us a task, He gives us all the tools we need for that task. Number 2, what Cornelius taught. In the state of fallen nature, interior grace is never resisted. So basically he's saying that if God offers us grace, okay, grace in that supernatural sense, that we cannot resist it. In other words, what he's basically saying, Judas Iscariot was never given grace. Remember, Judas Iscariot was one of the priests, the original priests, the 12. Okay? But Cornelius is saying that he couldn't resist that grace. But we know that he did. As, pardon? Yes, he resisted that grace. And we know it all the time that God will never refuse anybody the grace of faith, of hope and love. But we know that some humans accept it, others reject it. But it is interior grace. So he was wrong. So he said, in the state of fallen nature, interior grace is never resisted. It is wrong. In other words, what he's saying is that we can't make a choice. That's basically what Luther is going to Luther taught. Remember what we said about him, Luther, what he taught in the Babylonian whatever captivity, that we are like, a horse. Okay? If God gets on the back first, I do good. If the devil outbeats God, I do evil. But I have no choice in the matter. Who is going to ride the horse? That's basically what Cornelius is saying here. So in order to merit, number 3, in order to merit or demerit in the state of fallen nature, it is not necessary for the human person to have freedom from necessity, but freedom from coercion suffices. That's what we looked at earlier on. That is flatly wrong. So the semi-Pelagians, those who came after, Pelagius, admitted the necessity of a prevenient interior grace. We're going to look at that in our next section. The necessity of a prevenient interior grace for every act, even for the beginning of faith. And their heresy consisted in this, that they held this grace to be such that the human will could either resist it or submit to it. That was basically their heresy. And of course, it is semi-Pelagian to say that Christ died or shed his blood for all human beings without exception. So that has to be understood, in a correct way. That Jesus Christ shed his blood for everybody. But that doesn't mean that everybody is going to accept the fruits of this sacrifice. He died for everyone. So for them, they think, according to that coercion of basically, you can't resist the interior grace. So if Christ truly died for you, then you must be saved. But the thing is, as we know in life, someone can offer a gift and we can either accept or reject it. Doesn't mean that it's not a gift. Doesn't mean it's not grace. It is grace, but we have free will. So we can either take it or reject it. Okay, so let's take a break.